Thank you for joining us in This Week in Turkey. I am Murat Tursan. We begin again with distressing news, this time coming from Turkey's capital, Ankara. The district of Altındağ, home to many Syrian refugees, saw riots on Wednesday night, sparked by the alleged murder of an 18-year-old young man by a Syrian refugee. Reports indicate that the altercation took place between a group of Turks and a group of Syrians, resulting in the stabbing of Emirhan Yalçın. Tensions and anti-refugee sentiment had been on the rise in Turkey in recent months, fueled by, in part, a new wave of incoming Afghan refugees making headlines. A significant portion of the Turkish populace had long since been frustrated with the refugee crisis. Those frustrations now appear to have erupted into violence after the murder of Emirhan Yalçın. A large crowd descended on the Altındağ district after the incident and began damaging homes, businesses, and vehicles which they believe belonged to Syrians living in the district. The damage done was not so discriminating, however, as both Turks and Syrians reported damage to their homes and businesses. Medyascope's very own Özgür Özdemir and Okan Yücel from the Ankara office were on the scene the following morning.
Tensions were high in the capital city of Ankara on Wednesday night. Houses and workplaces belonging to Syrians were damaged in the Batalgazi, Önder, and Ulubey neighborhoods of the Altındağ district after the murder of Emirhan Yalçın by a Syrian refugee. The 18-year-old Emirhan Yalçın was killed in a fight between Syrian refugees and Turkish locals the same day. So far, prosecutors have reported that 2 people have been arrested in connection with the murder and that the investigation is ongoing. One of the suspects is 26-year-old Yahya Abdo, who is currently the prime suspect in the investigation. A large crowd gathered in the Altındağ district and began stoning houses and attacking Syrian-owned businesses, devolving into a full-blown riot. Criticisms of the police force were quick to surface as many on social media pointed out that the authorities were hesitant to quell the violence, only going as far as to prompting the crowds to disperse. Medyascope's Özgür Özdemir and Okan Yücel interviewed one of the Syrian families and the locals.
I was sitting right here that night. Many people gathered right here, started throwing stones. They broke all of the windows. One of the stones hit my daughter in the head. We called emergency services, but no one arrived. I don't understand why they did this.
We don't have a home in Syria. Where should we go? We want to stay here. My children are so young and my husband is ill.
This person who has had his business destroyed, what has he done to deserve this? I couldn't even bring the police over last night. The kid ran away from the scene and ran in here. The one who stabbed him. We caught him here and turned him over. We turned the suspect over to the police. He ran in here. They brought all of these no-good bombs here. They turned Altındağ into a ghetto, into a refugee camp. Our kids can't even play in that park over there. It's all full of bombs.
Joining me now to comment on the recent refugee crisis, lecturer at Kingston University, London, Dr. Doğuş Şimşek. Doctor, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for the invitation.
Doctor, I want to start off by asking you, what are some of the chief problems plaguing refugees as a whole in Turkey?
Thank you. Refugees have been facing a lot of problems in Turkey. According to research suggests that refugees continue to face barriers in accessing their education, health services, and acquiring decent housing, and even when they're employed as well. So they are frequently at greater risk of poverty, social exclusion compared to host country nationals, especially the lack of access to fundamental rights such as the labor market, housing, education, health might also cause the social exclusion of refugees, especially the ones who do not have income struggle to establish their lives in Turkey. Of course, temporary protection status has a lot of role in these problems. Having limited access to fundamental rights, of course, also socio-economic deprivation hinders their adaptation processes of those who are struggling to establish their lives in Turkey. So Turkey has adopted a new law on foreigners and international protection, which came into force in 2014. They elaborated on the temporary protection status of Syrians in Turkey, but this law also focused on guaranteeing that Syrians could not be returned to Syria until safe conditions established and access to fundamental rights that were also guaranteed. The rights of Syrian nationals in Turkey also came to include lawful stay in Turkey until the conflict was over in Syria. But the law also, as I mentioned, also under this law, there's labor market also guaranteed as a right, the task for enforcing, which was delegated to the Ministry of Social Security and Work. But there were some problems in accessing to these rights in practice. So an additional regulation was issued in 2016 that allows Syrian rights to apply for work permits. Of course, this has been commented as a good approach, but accessing the work permits have remained very difficult, and it has been dependent upon employers' willingness to offer contracts. As a result, a number of work permits granted Syrian refugees remain very low. The reality of most Syrians in Turkey remains that they work in an informal economy without any social security, faced with exploitation and lack safe working conditions. They're overworked, underpaid, with no social security and pension rights, and they primarily work in largely informal agriculture, textile sectors with a few safety protections. The ones who work in informal market, of course, face difficulties, especially in building bridges with receiving society as well, due to competition over employment opportunities. Findings from my own research also indicate that many Syrian refugees also experience financial hardship due to having limited access to labor market, which has also a negative effect on Syrian children's access to education as well, which is the other problematical area. They experience, as I said, exploitation, also lack of available information, exploitation at workplace, but also lack of available information on school registration, child labor, financial hardships. These are the main issues highlighted as main barriers that refugees face. Apart from these, of course, due to increased number of Syrians and also refugees scattered across the cities and towns in Turkey, racism has raised its head in Turkish society. Especially, it has started since the spring of 2014. Anti-Syrian sentiment had increased from then on. Turkish citizens who live in these cities, where there have been many Syrian refugees, criticize them as a major determinant in increasing, for instance, rent prices, reason for lowering wages in the labor market, and of rising the social tension. So the anti-Syrian sentiment and discriminatory discourses also, of course, heavily assess the creation and maintenance of a violent atmosphere. In the past, again in Ankara in 2014, the local people stoned and set fire to the buildings Syrian refugees lived in. So we can see that this is happening now as well. Nothing has changed throughout these years. Then they were marched against Syrian refugees. So it's because many Turkish citizens believe that they have been looked after with the taxes they pay, they steal their jobs, they're workers, beggars, criminals, culturally different, not modern, they create social tensions, etc. But these racist discourses have become legitimized through such phrases, for instance, the dichotomy between us and them that is constructed due to fear, hatred leads to the dehumanization of refugees who are transformed by the socioeconomic status into a racially distinct community. Of course, the politicians' discourses also have to do a lot with this as well.
I see. And Dr. Riots, also would like to ask you, in the past, we've seen Syrian refugees arrive as families. However, in contrast, the new wave of Afghan refugees arriving mostly appear to be younger men. What does this tell us about the current trend of refugees arriving in Turkey?
Sure. I think this totally depends on the condition, situation, cultural and economic conditions that they are experiencing behind their journey. A huge financial challenge for the whole family to cross the borders and then to reach Turkey. There are also too many safety risks for women and families on the road as well. For instance, violence against Afghan women and children on their migration routes that is happening, and it has been written by human rights organizations, but it was not properly reported. According to the president of the Afghan Turk Social, Culture and Solidarity Association in Turkey, Fazıl Ahmet Sönmez, he also mentioned that one of these reasons is very based on economy. And he also mentioned in one of his speeches that an arrival that cost $1,000 to $1,200 before the pandemic has now increased to $2,000. Each family chooses one or two people among themselves. They're usually young people. They come and work for a few years and save money, and then they take families with them if possible. And families therefore had to choose to take young people abroad to flee from the war. The elderly, of course, cannot stand the harsh conditions as well. Those who came were mainly young people and men, but they walked for a very long time. It was not easy for women and children, and they didn't know whether they would confused when they arrived. And then once they settled, they are also thinking that they could bring their families as well in Turkey and set up the order. There were also, but among them, there were also some women and children. They were not really reported much. But it's not, of course, correct to say that all of them were men. The ones who are women and children, of course, not as much as men, but because of the reasons that I mentioned, mainly related to economic reason and cultural reason. Of course, also the Afghan Federation of Associations president also stated that while traveling with families in the past years, there were incidents of ill treatment along the route caused by the human smugglers. The elderly cannot, of course, stand these difficult conditions on the road. So there are different factors that need to be considered when looking into this issue.
I see. Now, I kind of want to come back to the Syrian refugees. Now, Syrians have been migrating into Turkey since 2011. How integrated are Syrian refugees in Turkey, and are there any metrics we can use to measure their level of integration?
So, as we can see that there is no structured regulation regarding the integration framework. For instance, granting citizenship has lots of ambiguity in terms of who can apply and what are the actual conditions for ascribing citizenship. Of course, integration has to have a rights-based approach. So integration is about access to rights and resources. And citizenship is the final aspect, a final root of the integration process. But most of the public and policy debates on the integration of migrants and refugees have occurred due to Turkey's EU affairs, which required harmonization of relevant regulations to the EU accusation. There was no concrete formulation of integration policies until the Law on Foreigners International Protection legislation I just mentioned earlier, which came into force in 2014. So Article 96 in this law deliberately uses the term harmonization instead of integration, which reflects a very cautious approach to integration issues, which is not really rights-based. Consequently, the laws regarding labor market integration for foreigners have been rather weak due to the fact that Turkey was more of an immigration country as well as a transit country rather than an immigration country. The shift in these migration patterns towards more immigration coupled with the association negotiations with the EU have resulted in new legislative efforts since 2000 in Turkey's immigration laws and regulations. But it is gradually improving. The subsequent law that contains a very few new regulations on work permits and integration of foreigners into the labor market So laws also, the law also allows applicants for international protection or conditional refugees, including under those on subsidiary protection, to apply for a work permit 6 months after the international protection claim. But under these certain circumstances related to, for instance, labor market conditions and career developments, this access to labor market would be restricted for a given period, except for those refugees and subsidiary protection beneficiaries who have been residing in Turkey for 3 or more years, or married with Turkish citizens, or have children with Turkish citizenship. Although these laws facilitated the employment of non-Syrian refugees, they didn't address the needs of millions of Syrian refugees very well. Among all these years to their arrival in Turkey, regulation of working foreigners and international protection is not really working properly. Applications are made online by their employer, and employers do not always want to apply on behalf of refugees, because if they do, they need to pay the minimum wages and they need to make sure that there is social security is also established as well. So if the individual will work independently, then the application will be made by a foreigner under temporary protections. But there are 2 important aspects to this law. First, employers cannot be paid less than minimum wage. Second, the number of refugees under temporary protection is not to surpass 10% of the number of Turkish employees. Therefore, the number of applications for work permits has not yet been made by public. So therefore, these, if they do not have access to work, then it is very difficult for them to survive, or their integration processes will be very slow, and it's not successful. When considering from a broader perspective, due to the evaluation of the integration process depends on many different factors besides, of course, these ones. So the settlement law of 2006 grants the rights to permanent settlement in Turkey only to persons of Turkish descent and culture. In addition, Turkey's geographical limitation included in the 1951 Geneva Convention precludes non-European asylum seekers from permanent settlement in Turkey. So when we look at these 2 legislative reservations, we can see that it is quite difficult for them for their integration into the society should be successful. Also, the term harmonization is not really talking about rights-based approach. Therefore, long-term solutions are needed in each of these areas. First of all, a permanent and long-term residency. So Turkey should lift geographical limitation and then provide more permanent settlements for refugees as well.
I see.
If not, then they will try to go through Europe through irregular ways, and they will risk their lives.
I see. I'm actually rather glad you brought up the Geneva Convention. I wanted to approach this from a legality standpoint. The main opposition party, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, party chair rather, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu has said on multiple occasions that they intend to send refugees back within 2 years when the opposition comes to power. And also, he argued that the Afghan refugees could be sent back to Iran, but President Erdogan refuses to do so. From a legal perspective, how realistic are these claims?
Legally, it's not possible. CHP leader Kılıçdaroğlu's statement that we will send the Syrians back to their countries, it's a very seriously problematic rhetoric. One of the basic principles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is the right to live without fear, right? We all know this. The rhetoric, I will send the refugees back, is a violation of the fearless lives of millions of people. With this rhetoric, the CHP is making refugees causing to live in fear that being sent to their countries where they can face persecution, torture, or they might lose their lives. We don't know what might happen. They don't know what might happen, what's waiting for them. Refugees often as people who are fleeing persecution and war had to enter the country irregularly without passports. And Article 31 of the 1951 Geneva Convention provides that refugees entering the country irregularly cannot be punished. So the opposition is committing a human rights violation in terms of its consequences. The most important article of the 1951 Geneva Convention on the Status of Refugees is the Article 33, which is the principle of non-refoulement principle that Turkey has also a part of it. Turkey is a signatory of the 1951 Geneva Convention and its 1967 additional protocol on the status of refugees. Although Turkey retains geographical limitation to its ratification and of the 1951 UN Geneva Convention on the status of refugees, which means that only those fleeing as a consequence of events occurring in Europe can be given refugee status. But in line with this, the asylum rights are limited only to Europeans, whereas Syrians who have fled to Turkey are recognized as people with temporary protection status, not as refugees. But regardless of any geographical limitation under the Refugee Convention, Turkey has abided the principle of non-refoulement, meaning that no one may be returned to a country in which he, she may face persecution. So the non-refoulement obligation is one of the few articles in the Refugee Convention to which reservations cannot be made. Furthermore, refoulement persons to countries where they are at risk of torture, cruel, inhuman, degrading treatment is prohibited. So the Turkish government should also remove the geographical restrictions on the application to the Refugee Convention and should be reminded of its obligation to uphold the principle of non-refoulement regardless of the geographical restriction.
I see, Doctor. And finally, I'd like to end on the political aspect of this, if you don't mind. Now, in the past, we've seen President Erdogan making deals with the West to keep Syrians and Afghan refugees in Turkey in exchange for financial aid and releasing the refugees upon the Greek and Bulgarian borders in instances of disagreement. To what extent are refugees in Turkey being used as a pawn in a political game by the presidential administration?
Sure. Refugees in Turkey have always been used as a political tool by politicians, not only by the ruling party, but also the opposition party as well. So the presidential administration has been using migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers as a foreign policy tool and a means of blackmailing Europe to promote the Turkish interests. It threatens to open the borders, for instance, in the past, and let massive numbers of refugees and migrants into Europe. But we have seen, for instance, that Turkey's lands and sea borders with the EU is that people seeking asylum once again are being used as bargaining chips in a deadly political game, a predictable consequence of the EU-Turkey deal. EU member states need to do far more to share responsibility. Of course, it's not only under the hands of Turkey for asylum seekers arriving in Turkey, both throughout financial support, but also ensuring a safe pathways to Europe as well. So Greece and Bulgaria, of course, also must ensure access to their territory for people seeking protection at the border. Guards should refrain from excessive use of forced rights to those gathered at the border. As I said, refugees in Turkey are also used as a political tool by the opposition party. For instance, CHP chairman, as we have also mentioned earlier, that he said that he will send the Syrians home. Also, the Bolu mayor, Tanju Özcan, who said that he would propose the northwestern province of the municipal assembly a motion to charge a 10-fold fee for the water bills and solid waste taxes for foreigners in reference to refugees who fled from Syria. He said we cut off their aid and stopped giving them business licenses to open shops, but they didn't leave. And he said, who is from Turkey's main opposition, Republican People's Party, during a meeting at the municipal building. But these such racist discourses do not only target Syrian refugees, but also use them as a policy-making tool, which such discourses racism has slowly been shown to impact almost all society. This is what we have seen in Ankara recently. An inclusive national dialogue, therefore, is needed to distinguish unfounded speculation from legitimate concerns, but the polarized environment hinders an integration debate as well, so everything is sort of interconnected with each other. Therefore, opposition parties also complain President decisions on refugees without consulting and wants them to use an archive absolute power. But I think both parties also should not use refugees as a political tool, but should also see this issue as a human rights issue and refugees as rights. They have to be under protection. They have to access a certain rights. And they should also remember that they are signatory of the international law and some of the human rights law as well.
I see. Dr. Thank you for your insight, and thank you for joining us this week.
Thank you.
Continuing on natural disasters in Turkey, the massive wildfires that had engulfed Turkey last week are finally under control. With a stroke of luck, rainfall began on the 11th day of the fires. Along with the tireless efforts of thousands of personnel and volunteers, the flames have finally been quelled. But the disaster has left untold financial damage in its wake, where some have lost most, if not all, of what they had. But at the same time, the showers weren't all good news, unfortunately, as the heavy rainfall in the northern provinces caused massive flash floods. Death toll climbs as the floods wreak havoc in the Black Sea region of Turkey.
After 11 days of battling the flames, Turkey's fortune finally turns as rainfall helps firefighters and volunteers gain control of the blazes. The Ministry of Forestry and Agriculture is now reporting all major fires are under control. But the massive toll of the fires still looms as the 11-day inferno leaves behind untold damage to farmlands, livestock, and houses.
When I close my eyes, I still see the flames. It's an unspeakable feeling. I feel like I'm living it now. The fire swept through my house and my neighbors' houses. And yes, maybe we push it to the back of our minds, but when I close my eyes, I still see the flames engulfing my house. I only have one house, a husband and my son. I have nothing else. I have nowhere to go. And we lost all of our income. We make our living through olive oil. We live on our crops, but it's all over now.
We are devastated. Our olives are gone. As farmers, we have no hope left. How long it will take for new olive trees to grow, how long it will take for them to bear fruit. Perhaps we won't even live to see it. We have lost so much.
Meanwhile, in the northern part of the country, however, the provinces of Sinop, Kastamonu, and Karabük are battling a completely different kind of natural disaster. The pouring rain that came over the province on Wednesday has caused floods and devastation throughout the area. So far, 27 people are reported dead. The Turkish Disaster and Emergency Management Directorate has reported over 4,600 personnel, 600 vehicles, 19 helicopters, and various other disaster response assets are on scene. Search and rescue operations are underway to retrieve many who have been stranded and carried away by floodwaters.
As the United States nears the completion of its full withdrawal from Afghanistan, Taliban is advancing at breakneck speed, reportedly having captured close to two-thirds of all capitals in the country. As Taliban advances, however, Turkey appears to be intent on staying in Afghanistan. President Erdogan had reached a deal with the U.S. earlier this year where Turkish forces are to take over the security operations of Kabul airport in Afghanistan's capital in exchange for military and financial aid. President Erdogan had reiterated in the past that he was very optimistic about Afghanistan's future and Turkey's role in the peace process. Minister of Defense Hulusi Akar visited Pakistan and met with Prime Minister Imran Khan and Pakistan's defense minister in an effort to rally allies in Turkey's future role in Afghanistan.
Hey, folks. Make a brief opening statement here.
The Taliban's continuing advance in Afghanistan has sparked criticisms over President Joe Biden's decision to withdraw U.S. troops and leave the Afghan government to fight alone. So far, the Taliban has taken control of almost two-thirds of Afghanistan. On Thursday, the Taliban captured the strategically significant city of Ghazni, which became the 10th provincial capital to be partly or partially overrun by the Taliban. Despite the risks, however, Turkey is still intent on taking over the control of the Kabul airport. Earlier this year, the US and Turkish government agreed on a deal for Turkey to provide security for the capital city's airport in exchange for military aid from the US, all while the Taliban had warned Turkey against keeping troops in Afghanistan. A senior Turkish official told Reuters, the talks and the process are continuing, but of course the situation in Afghanistan is being followed closely. On Wednesday evening, President Erdogan said that he could meet with the Taliban as a part of efforts to end fighting in Afghanistan. President Erdogan commented, Turkey's relevant institutions are currently working on talks with the Taliban. Perhaps I could even be in a position to receive their envoy. On Tuesday, Turkish Defense Minister Hulusi Akar visited Islamabad to discuss the bilateral and regional issues with Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan. Khan stated that Islamabad would continue to make every effort to help advance the Afghan peace process. Akar also met Pakistani President Arif Ali, Army Chief Qatar Javed Bajwa, and Defense Minister Parvez Katak.
In other news, President Erdogan is known for his unorthodox monetary policies and replacing heads of central bank when said bank policies clash with his. A vocal proponent of keeping interest rates low in order to incentivize more borrowing, the president has replaced the head of the Turkish central bank 7 times. The central bank and the president may again find themselves at odds as a third-quarter central bank committee meeting ended with the decision to keep the interest rates at 19%, whereas President Erdogan promises a 2-point drop.
The governorship of the Central Bank of Turkey has long been a revolving door. Since the ruling party AKP took power in 2003, the governor of the central bank has been replaced 7 times. Under the leadership of Naci Ağbal, the previous governor, the central bank had increased the interest rates from 17% to 19%, a policy in direct conflict with President Erdogan's views, who is a well-known advocate of keeping interest rates low. Ağbal was dismissed by President Erdogan after the interest rates increase. Following his dismissal, Şahap Kavcıoğlu was appointed in his place. The Central Bank Monetary Policy Committee chaired by Kavcıoğlu continued to maintain the rates at 19% after each committee meeting since his appointment. In a speech announcing the third-quarter inflation report of the year in July, Kavcıoğlu assured of the continuation of tight monetary policy, saying, "The current high levels of inflation and projections require that the tight monetary stance be strictly maintained until we see strong indicators of a permanent decline in inflation." Although Kavcıoğlu's statement indicated that the rates could not be lowered, President Erdogan declared a week later on Wednesday, "It is not possible for inflation to go up any now. We will start seeing a decline in interest rates. There will be no high interest rates. High interest rates will bring us high inflation." While Erdogan's words implied that the central bank's ability to lower the policy rate, other developments indicated that the interest rates would remain constant at 19%. In the post-meeting statement of the Monetary Policy Committee, however, it was reiterated that the current tight monetary policies would continue to be in effect until a significant decrease in the projections.
Moving on to the coronavirus, currently 70% of the population have received their first shots, and at least 50% have been fully inoculated with both. According to data released by the Ministry of Health, the daily number of new cases on August 11th was just over 27,000. On the same day, 128 deaths due to complications from COVID were reported. These numbers have led to the total number of reported cases to reach just over 5.7 million as of today. Additionally, 51,000 deaths due to COVID have been reported to date. Health Minister Fahrettin Koca also announced that the schools would reopen as planned, but inversely, many businesses and unions in the country are taking the opposite approach as COVID numbers continue to climb.
On August 11th, Health Minister Fahrettin Koca announced that all schools will reopen as scheduled, resuming face-to-face classes. In contrast, according to the most recent press release by the Turkish Coffee Shop Federation, effective as of August 5th, people without their second vaccine shots will not be admitted to the coffee houses or food stalls. In a statement published on August 11th, the Turkish Football Federation announced that only those who have been fully inoculated with 2 shots will be admitted to the football stadiums, granted at least 2 weeks have elapsed since their last shot. In addition, those who have already had COVID will only be allowed into the stadiums 180 days after their quarantine period. Children, ages 12 and below, and those who haven't received their second shots will only be able to attend the game if they are able to provide a negative PCR test done within 48 hours before the game. During the 2021 and 2022 season, only the home team spectators will be admitted to the stadiums, and access to the VIP and press boxes will be subject to the same requirements.
That's it for us in This Week in Turkey. I have been Murat Tursan, and thank you for joining us.
Türkiye'nin sivil, bağımsız, özgür ve çoğulcu bir medya ortamına ihtiyacı var. Medyascope, 20 Ağustos 2015'te bu ihtiyacı karşılamak üzere yola çıktı. Ama yolumuz uzun. Bu yolculukta bize Patreon veya YouTube'un katıl butonu üzerinden katkıda bulunabilirsiniz. Destek verin, sizinle güçlenelim.